that's something that we would refer over to our professional standards, and they would fully investigate that. And I mean, we've had troopers charged criminally with assaulting people during arrests. We had some in Detroit that were charged with kidnapping after they took an individual from a particular location just because he was a vagrant and transported him up to another city. So I mean, it happens. I mean, but the best thing you can do is to address it. And like we talked about, the lieutenant hit the nail on the head with, failure to supervise will get you sued every single time. That's true.
And I know some of the areas that we try to address in some of my courses, and I know in the other professors' courses as well, that the use of force does not indicate, use of force is oftentimes employed because of, granted, the situation of an action and reaction, but then it's the continued, maybe excessive use of force that is problematic and then becomes then a department issue. And then these alarming cases nationwide that really do cause confusion and then do set a new standard for maybe training for all of you. So, no, that's wonderful. Ellie, do you want to come and grab the mic so far, and then we can have some audience members geared towards the question?
Do you have any questions for the panel? If you got a voice like mine, you don't need a microphone, but maybe we have some soft people in here. What do we got questions here? I have some criminal justice majors that need to speak
Maybe
up.
questions on the force continuum?
Good question?
You got questions over here?
What? Where is this? Oh, Austin? Sorry, I was walking away.
So something was mentioned about during, like if an officer comes back and says they were never trained about something, that I can look in the records and see that, but what happens if they actually, for some reason, weren't trained to respond to an incident that happened to them, and they responded poorly but had never been actually trained to respond to it? Like what usually happens in those situations?
Depending on the type of situation that it is, we try and cover all the bases at the training academy. Like I said, from defensive tactics, use of force with a firearm. So we try and cover everything the best that we can. There might be an incident out there that something might happen that might be so obscure that maybe we haven't been able to train for that. But as the panel members have stated, we learn from others' misfortunes. So we can take things away from the different use of force scenarios in the different cities, and we can try and incorporate that into our training to try and cover those bases. But again, you have to look at the reasonable objectiveness. How would you respond in that situation? And that's what you have to look at. I mean, we can't cover everything 100%, but at the same time, you have to put yourself in that position. What would you do at that time? We can do the best we can, but we can't cover everything. Again, depending on what the case is, maybe it is something where it might be a reprimand. It could be up to days off. Depending on it, could be a criminal instance, right? And they're going to get charged criminally in the court. That would be a case where if it was use of a firearm, then my supervisor, Sergeant Theron, would probably end up going into court, or myself, depending, because him and I both kind of run the range. He's the boss, and when he's not there, I'm in charge. So again, depending on who taught what at what time, we might be the ones getting called into court, and we'll be answering the questions to the judge and jury and prosecuting attorneys as far as how they were trained. So we try and do the best we can. Does that answer your question, sir?
Can I add on to that too? Trooper Ford and anyone else open to this, could you briefly talk about the totality of the circumstances in regards to maybe just a immediate interaction with any citizen?
Judge Piscopo.
Well, really, that applies across the spectrum. I think our students here are so familiar with that. But you take each case and you try to look at what's involved in a particular case. It's almost like a checklist. And case law is a good way to learn about that. What will the judge, what will the jury look for? What happened? What was the officer's response to that? What was the severity of the crime? Could some type of less use of force, would that would have been more appropriate? All these factors are taken into consideration. And from that, then The judge, if it's in a summary disposition case where someone has said they have filed a civil lawsuit to try to get monies because the police officer did not do their job properly, if it doesn't meet a certain standard, and if it's something that a jury no way could come up with the possibility of a recovery for the plaintiff, the person who was injured, the judge can summarily dismiss that case. A lot of cases are also settled. If it gets past a motion for summary disposition, a lot of cases are settled because the parties don't want to take a chance what might happen if it goes to court. But those that do go to court, those that become published decisions, give us a good idea in the future what to expect. So again, it's really tough to answer that question because you have to know the facts and circumstances of that particular case. What did the person do? What did the citizen do? How did the officer react? How did it escalate? What did the officer do in response to that? What was the underlying severity of the crime? Things of that nature. That's exactly what we're going to look at. And once you take all of that into consideration, there should be there's an expected outcome at that point.
And I think Lieutenant Detective Moore addressed that issue too. Before we make any assumptions about what is existing and taking place in the media, we really need to gather all the facts before we can then pass judgment on that. So, no, good, thank you.
Okay, so now that citizens may legally possess tasers, has this caused the police departments to update their training and or policies for use of force?
For us, I mean, not really. I mean, tasers are can legally be possessed by people who have concealed weapons permits. So that's people that we come in contact quite often that are armed. I think Trooper Brown hit it on the head. You know, you got to keep a cool head. Just because you see a gun in the car doesn't mean it's not supposed to be there. You know, you do have to keep a cool head when it comes to that. And the taser's no different. It's still a weapon that can immobilize you. So I would say just more awareness than anything.
And also to add to that, because of the traffic stops, because we're in people's houses and different types of calls, yeah, and a lot of times people will tell us, I have a taser, I have a weapon. If you have a permit, you're definitely supposed to tell us the first thing. And usually I'll tell the person, as long as you don't touch it, where your weapon at, so now I know, so that way it won't be any accidents. Because as long as the officer is aware of what's going on, you let them know, then there's no surprises. Because you got to figure, when an officer pulls you over, or they respond to some type of domestic or some type of assault call, the officer is on edge because he knows no one there. Everybody's talking, so he has to go through and just calm everybody down and figure out what's going on and find out what laws were violated and seeing if anyone is hurt or going to be arrested. So as long as you make that known that you have it, there won't be any issues.
There was one area that kind of shook law enforcement. Again, me 24 years on, anybody walking down the street, I'm going to switch it a little bit here to go towards open carry. Anyone having an open pistol on their hip, when I was coming up through the ranks of officer, I mean, that was automatic. You know, somebody's going to jail, no doubt about it. When people started practicing open carry in buildings and facilities, grocery stores, down the street, going to restaurants with, you know, AR-15 strapped around their back, I mean, obviously that generated a lot of 911 calls. And I know, Jackson, we had quite a few. And actually, we were shook on how to handle that. I mean, we really had to get our prosecutors involved, lessons learned from other organizations, so that we didn't get sued, and that we changed our paradigm on how we trained and how we looked at open carry personnel while we're doing our job. So open carry did change a lot for law enforcement. It really did when it initially started.
I'd like to touch on that too, because that's a real big topic, and you see it a lot too, where officers will be goaded in by these groups to try to take some type of an action and maybe go outside the scope of their authority, and that's where really, you talk about de-escalation. When you're dealing with someone who has a semi-automatic assault weapon, you know, you have a pistol on your hip, you're kind of outgunned. You know, and you really have to use your good judgment and understand really what the purpose of what their whole purpose of being is. You know, they're out there exercising their rights. They're trying to put you on front page news, and you really have to be careful on your response. And we did the same thing that Jackson PD did. We got a hold of our prosecutor. When we ever have one of these groups, when I was a post commander over in Jonesville, we had one in Hillsdale. They had a huge protest at a park, and we did exactly that. We did not fall victim to a lawsuit or try to take away someone's legal right to openly carry.
Good evening. My question is going to be about the fact that we live in a very multicultural society nowadays. And I'm sure that everyone up on the stage has come in contact with somebody they could not communicate with, either verbally because of language difference or because perhaps it was a deaf mute and needed a ASL capability in order to communicate. If someone's agitated and you cannot communicate with them, how do you handle that situation? Do you have resources available where you can call in for a translator on the job, in the field? Just how would you handle that situation?
That's a great question. In fact, I teach a course called Fair and Impartial Policing that talks about implicit bias. And one of our case studies is the Amadou Diallo case, where it was a Haitian immigrant who was on the porch, and all he was doing is standing on the porch. And these officers saw him, and there was a rash of break-ins, and they took him as a suspect, but he was standing on his own porch. Unfortunately, he couldn't communicate with the officers, so he tried to run, get back in the house, and they ended up killing him. And what I do in that case study is I really just break it down, and we really talk about de-escalating the whole situation. Really look at what you have. I mean, unless your life is in jeopardy, you don't have to go right up to 100. You can always back it down. You can always bring in other resources. And we do have quite a few translators for common languages. I think if we got into something like a smaller country, a language that is not very common, we would have a hard time. Probably go to a language line or something like that. But that's generally what we do, is try to de-escalate it and then try to get the individual to calm down.
We do have resources available through the Central Dispatch for the Sheriff's Office. There are volunteers that we can contact to come out. I had a similar situation at the grocery store the other night. I used the phone app to communicate with the person to find out what the issue was. I think technology will eventually catch up with us and help us out there, but until it does, we do have volunteers that we can call.
I'll even add to that. As far as being on patrol, I've come over the 23 years I've been out there. I've come over people that are deaf. And what usually happens is when I'm communicating with them, they tell me, oh, they have a card that says I'm deaf. I will get out my notebook and I will write, because most of the time they can read letters. But I'll go ahead and write, and we'll exchange my notebook back and forth. So I'm explaining to them the reason why they're being stopped, and that way they can tell me what's going on. Also, in our area in Monroe County, we have Border Patrol. So we get a lot of Hispanics in our area, and usually if I come across a Hispanic driver who does not speak English, which I didn't think that was possible to get a Michigan driver's license, and you couldn't, but it is. So we'll get Border Patrol, we'll have one of the agents, they're fluent in Spanish, and have them communicate with the driver so we can explain to them why they're being stopped.
My question is how would you respond, or rather, how are you trained to respond as far as when it comes to jumping the continuum, going from a low-level situation to a high-level situation, vice versa?
I guess it would depend on the situation. If you're, for example, traffic stop, he was an elderly gentleman in his 60s, stopped him for a tail light out, didn't have a seatbelt on. This was before seatbelt law became a primary stop. So myself and my probationary trooper, we stopped this gentleman, get him back, file check, we ended up having a warrant. And when he gave me his license, I guess he had a substantial amount of cash on him. And to me, it appeared he would have had enough to post his bond, right? So It was as simple as I went back up, advised him of the warrant. I said, I noticed you had some cash on you, would you be able to post this much money for your bond? He let loose with a slew of obscenities, and basically he wasn't going to pay the bond. I said, well, if you're not going to pay the bond, then you're going to be placed under arrest. At that point, he then interlocked his arm through his steering wheel. So it went from something simple to where now he's actively resisting. I didn't want to spray him with the OCCS spray. I thought that might have been a little excessive because of his age. I didn't want to have to do that. So we ended up forcibly moving him out of the car. We didn't take him down to the ground or anything, but we extricated him from the car, brought him to the back of the trunk, handcuffed him, put him in our patrol car, and took him to county. So something very simple that could have been handled, but like I said, there's just some people that you can't talk to. He didn't want to pay his bond. So again, when you look at a subject's actions, you might have to escalate it. I did not want to have to put my hands on this gentleman, but at the same time, when your hand gets forced to a certain point, I can't just say, okay, well, we'll forget the warrant, you can take care of it later, and you're on your way. I can't do that. So again, depending on what the subject's actions are, you might have to jump over one. I tried being polite, trying to get the money from him to pay the bond. That didn't work. And when I asked him to step out of the car, he hit the door lock. The window was down, so I mean, that was no big deal. But when he started intertwining his arms through the steering wheel so he can't come out of the car, then you're at that point forced to go hands on. So, and then just that simple warrant, he could have posted his bond for and went on his way with an appearance ticket to go to court on a certain day. Then he ended up getting charged with obstructing, resisting obstruction. So then he ended up, that's a 2-year misdemeanor. So, just something so simple, it escalates. And again, when things get out of your hand, you might have to take that next step up where you have to go hands on. And I know the panel said, the last thing I want to do is put hands on somebody. The last thing I ever want to do is have to employ deadly force. I've gone 22 and a half years. I've drawn my weapon a couple times in the line of duty. Thank God I didn't have to use it. And I tell that to every recruit I train. I pray to God that never, during their whole career, they ever have to draw and use their weapon. Because I can't even imagine ramifications afterwards. You might be justified, but you're a human being. You have a soul, you have a conscience, and that choice you make, you have to live with for the rest of your life. And you might only have a split second to make that decision. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Alrighty, I have a question for you real quick. I'm not a criminal justice major, I'm a social work, but I had a question about something you said earlier. Can you open carry a stun gun or the other one you said earlier?
Taser?
Taser, or does that have to be concealed permit? Can you open carry that, or do you need an actual little letter or some kind of certification or licensing that you can carry that?
The taser is kind of a little bit different because it's the only exception to carry it is that you are a CPL holder. But I don't think there's any requirement to carry it concealed as long as you can legally possess it. That's where the trick bag would be. If we came across someone that was openly displayed a taser, there's a legal remedy for us to check to make sure that you're supposed to have it. But a firearm is a little bit different. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
My question is there a standard policy for high-speed pursuit, or is it different from agency to agency?
I know every agency here has a policy on pursuits. And again, like use of force, it is a very, very tough policy. When I mean tough, we're very stringent on the guidelines that the state set forth on what an officer can do when they are pursuing, why they're pursuing, the speeds, the weather, what are they chasing for. All of those factors come into place. And again, it's based on what that officer sees right then and there. Does somebody running through a red light give an officer a reason to chase somebody going 85 mile an hour down a busy intersection and 12 o'clock noon? Is that reasonable to do so? Probably not. And we have things in our policy that kind of govern that. We also have, again, like I said, supervisors that work that will terminate something that is definitely not reasonable based on what that officer is actually calling out the reasons why they're pursuing. So yes, policy with use of force and vehicle pursuits are weighed on a lot, trained on heavily.
I think Lieutenant Simpson and I are going to be the only ones with a different policy here as the two roses between the state thorns. But what we base our policy on, there's the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police, there's the International Association of Chiefs of Police. They put forth model policies for member agencies to use. They try to base it on best practices, on reducing liability. So while Jackson and Adrian's policies may not be identical, they're going to be very similar in the elements, just worded a little differently, if that answers your question. Those are available for all of us to use. And Lieutenant Simpson hit on it at the beginning that we also have a training consortium with 25 member agencies. So if his policy varies from ours a little bit, we're going to share that information and we're going to learn from each other's experience, and maybe we're going to tweak ours or they're going to tweak theirs to make the best we can.
We have a policy that's very thick when it comes to all the justifications for a pursuit. I mean, exactly like theirs. We also do blue teams, that early warning system I talked about for use of force. We do a separate report for each pursuit, and the trooper has to outline every single one of the factors: ticket violation, road conditions, the traffic at the time. All of that stuff are factors that either allows a pursuit to continue or discontinue. Then we have what some people refer to as the 7 deadly sins, or the life-threatening felonies, whatever you want to call them. If we're pursuing a subject that committed one of the life-threatening felonies that we can use their firearm for, we'll continue the pursuit. We can actually ram the person with a vehicle to put an end to that into the pursuit for one of those life-threatening felonies.
Oh, yeah, pursuits are fun. They're fun. High speed, you see them on TV, they're a good time. Our supervisors are monitoring the radios because we're calling out everything. We're going here, we're on this road, the traffic, and the supervisor will ask, how is the traffic? Is there anything else going on while you're chasing? So they're fun, but they keep you regulated. So I've been in quite a few chases and I've been canceled or called off a chase because it starts to get too dangerous. But you definitely have to be aware of your surroundings during the chase, because you can be on a freeway or you can be in a neighborhood. But we have the rules to follow. All the troops know the rules. It's just our supervisors are just holding the reins, make sure we don't get out of control.
I'll hit on something else that Trooper Brown, and I know he does this because he's very conscientious, but the troops have the authority to terminate a pursuit whenever they want. It doesn't have to be a supervisor. It could be the officer on the street. If they think, the trooper thinks that it's getting to the point where it's too dangerous, we've seen this many times where they'll say, we're going to discontinue because it just reached that point. They'd rather do that than see somebody get killed.
Yeah. It's such a high liability issue, like use of force and pursuit policy. Again, like the state police, they do their blue team. We do the same thing. You have a pursuit memorandum you have to complete. The supervisor, the officer has to complete a certain form for pursuing. It's all reviewed. We look at everybody's video that is working that day during the time that pursuit happened to make sure other officers, when they're hearing this pursuit, are driving correctly, because it is a very high liability item here. One of the officers, they step outside of policy, lose control of that vehicle, kill someone, or even kill themselves. I mean, that's a bad day for any municipality, county, or state agency.
Howdy. Okay, so this is actually my senior topic here, is use of force, and it's a pretty broad topic, and it kind of stinks because limiting it down is pretty difficult. But one thing that I found is a study shows that 60% of officers use less force than they would be justified to, but only about 10% of officers use more force than the situation justifies, and that's what you see on the media, that's what you see in the news, and oftentimes officers catch flack for that. And like you said, it spreads nationwide. You know, regardless of if the situation happened in Missouri or in California or whatnot, officers from Michigan are affected because it's an interconnected system. So how do you personally deal with that 10%, that, a relative may see on Facebook or social media? How do you personally deal with that in your relationships on the road?
Well, I guess I'll start that one. You have to take everything as an individual, because take for instance, I pull you over, you're speeding. I don't know that your mother just passed away. I don't know that you had a death in the family. I don't know if you had an assault, you got an argument with your wife before you took off. You're angry at the world, you're not concentrating, you're just trying to get somewhere. And then this trooper stops you for no reason, because you don't even realize you're speeding. When I get up there and I start talking to you and you're spitting this fire at me, I gotta be able to make you calm down. So I'm not going to spit fire back at you. It's all about personality. I would rather talk you down and see what's going on, explain the situation, that you're being stopped for something you don't realize you're doing, and then we'll take it from there. But you have to take each case as an individual case, because you never know. And like what's been said earlier, some people you can't go there. They're going to go this high every time. And if it's a traffic stop that I'm dealing with, you're not going to come down. I'm going to get the information I need from you, serve you with whatever you were doing wrong, and get you on your way. But if it's a situation where something else is going on, I'm going to talk to you. And I'm not going to raise my voice every time you're yelling.